Welcome everyone to Weekend Escapades. Today we have found our way to the Mountain Meadow Massacre site. And we're going to go to all of the sites. The overlook is up on the hill behind us. We are at number 2, which is the trail loop, and also the memorial is right over there. And this is the memorial to the men and boys, older boys, and this is a memorial to the women, the children, and wounded. Come along and join the adventure. Now the site's well preserved. It's got a nice walking path. There's a 600, I think they said 600 yard loop or whatever it is up here, where the actual wagon train was, of course, attacked during that massacre. And we're going to share that location with you. Nice and green down here, but it is very warm today for sure. Coming around the corner here on the trail, flags are flying high. You get the sun in the lens of this camera. It gets a lot of reflection, little orb looking things. So I'll try to keep it out of the sun. I've noticed that's one thing about this particular camera, that it doesn't do real well in direct sun. This is the gravesite memorial. So the rock is patterned after one that was built on May of 1859, almost 2 years after the Mountain Meadow Massacre. The original was 50 feet around and 12 feet high, and it was topped by a cedar cross extending another 12 feet. So this is kind of a recreation of that, but there's no cross on top. This whole area is maintained by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, out of respect for those who died and were buried here and in the surrounding areas following the massacre of 1857. It was dedicated the 11th of September 1999. It's actually a very sad location, but a memorial, because as you walk around, there's just a tremendous amount of names all around the footings. Now, members of the Arkansas Wagon Train set up camp at this site on Monday, September 5th, 1857, and on Sunday they likely rested and gathered for a Christian worship service, a pattern they had followed throughout their journey. And right out there is the meadow, and you'll see there's some benches and things off in the distance and a walking path, because this is literally where that siege happened with that wagon train, where they actually fought. So what they did in this location is they literally chained the wagon beds together, and this provided a shield against gunfire. They also dug a defensive trench that served as a rifle pit. About 140 men and women and children tried to take cover at the wagon circle, with many huddling together in the trench. At least 7 immigrants were killed here in the first attack. So this went on for a few days, but literally was under siege, I believe, until the 11th of September is when actually the massacre took place. You can see the sign there. The Mountain Meadow Massacre site has been designated as a historic landmark. This site possesses national significance in commemorating the history of the United States of America. This was donated 2011, National Park Service, United States Department of Interior. So it is definitely a national historic site. It's a shame that it ever happened. But at the same time, hopefully we can learn from this kind of thing. So the walking path goes out here a ways into this meadow. And as we go around, it'll tell a little story as to what and where this all happened out here in this meadow, including the area where you see the greenery down there is where the creek actually ran. And if I'm not mistaken, they used to have to get away from the wagon train that they put together and try to get water out of that creek to be able to survive while they're under siege and being attacked. They ran out of resources fairly quickly. Ammunition, food, water, all huddled under a tremendous amount of wagons. There was a lot of livestock here as well. About 120 yards to the siege memorial. So here is the memorial, ever remembered, in honor of those who rest in this field. They were innocent and died in unjust attacks that began on September 7th, 1857. They were defending their friends and families who buried them before leaving the protection of their camp. To the other victims of the Mountain Meadows Massacres who lie in unknown graves, rest in peace and be assured you are remembered. All right, so we're walking up on the next marker here on this long trail in the heat. Execution at the scene of the crime. In September of 1874, a federal grand jury indicted 9 Mormon militias, or militiamen I should say, for crimes related to the siege and the massacre of some of those men. Immediately went into holding as fugitives for justice. About 50 of the militiamen were involved in the massacre, along with an unknown number of Paiute Indians. Only John D. Lee was brought to trial and convicted. And on March 23rd of 1877, almost 20 years after the massacre, federal officials took Lee to the scene of the crimes not far from this very spot, and he was executed by firing squad. He was buried in a cemetery about 120 miles from here. And that is from the National Historic Landmark Society. You know, one thing is that when you see this meadow behind you and you realize that there was a wagon train here, and they stopped here for the cattle grazing by way of Cedar City. They came through Cedar City, and originally they said that they were making threats, and that's when the whole thing started. So they sent them down here to Mountain Meadows. They knew they were coming this direction, and it was said that I think it was Haight and also Lee knew about this siege, and that they got the Paiutes to do it. And then after the Paiutes couldn't get the job done, that they sent in the militiamen, about 50 of them, to come in and clean it up. That's what history says. You be the judge. You can look it up online. I don't get into it. It's very controversial. But it is sad, regardless of what the facts are. Well, right down here would have been the creek. That's always been here. And so when this was actually happening, they retreated for water here from the wagon trains that were put up here to protect themselves. And there are still people from that wagon train that were buried here by their friends and family as they passed during the fighting until September 11th. Okay, we are at the overlook location, and this is the same sign that was down below. So we're going to walk up to the overlook, and it shows you exactly where these terrible things happened. So just a little piece of it here. A senator's recollection. On September 16th, 1859, 17-year-old James H. Berry witnessed an event that he would never forget. He saw 15 children return to relatives and friends in Carrollton, Arkansas. They were escorted by a group of their relatives led by Arkansas Senator William C. Mitchell. 2 other children would return in January of 1860. So out of this whole event, that's all the children that were left. And what happened is after the massacre, they were all under 6 years old, the survivors, well, that they let survive. And those children were then raised for a period of time by LDS families, Mormon families at the time, and then later returned to their families. So on this placard it says, in 1859, Major James H. Carleton interviewed Mrs. Rachel Hamblin, who lived a few miles north of the massacre field. Major Carleton carefully recorded her account of the surviving children, who were brought to her home on September 11th of 1857 after witnessing the murder of their parents. Okay, I don't even like reading that. Let's head on up to this viewing site. Here's another site with all those spotters here. Out there is the immigrant campsite where we were located, where the memorial is. And you'll see right through there, that's where the campsite was, where the wagon trains were rounded up in defense of the Indians and the militia. And this is a wall with all the names in memoriam. And that would be, of course, artist's rendering of the wagon train. This is the Women's and Children Memorial, where the wagons were taken with the women and children, and they were literally massacred on that spot. This one is a little bit closer in, but this was the Men and Boy Memorial massacre site. Now, one of the things is that it was said that anybody under 6, the children, they took by wagon train after all this was done, this horrific event, and they were taken in a wagon train to the home of a lady who heard the gunshots, and she heard all these gunshots going off in the distance here. Those gunshots were taking place here, of course, after days of it happening here. When it was all done and quiet, that wagon train took off, and John Lee and his militiamen pulled up with those kids and stayed there and left 3 of them behind with her that she raised. If I'm not mistaken, 2 of them had gunshot wounds, and one of them never gained the use of their arm again. Now, it would have been, I believe, Mrs. Hamblin, so it was Hamblin Ranch. I also think, I know for a fact, so Pinto is over this direction. And Pinto is an old pioneer town, and if you go through Pinto and you could head off to Cedar that direction, through Iron Town, Iron Mountain there, where we filmed about the old iron furnaces. But Pinto off in the distance, so one of those ranching homes where Mrs. Hamlin was, they kept the 3 children and they brought all the kids there to be taken care of after this event, is off in the distance there. But I think the militiamen took rest or hid after this event in Pinto. Alright, so I've switched to a different hat as I was just cooking out here in the sun. So this is the memorial to the women and children and wounded. So this would have been, I believe, the last destination before the wagon train took off, or the wagon took off of the kids that were under 6 that direction. So this is the location, of course, as we see another map there. So each one of these have the same map, so you don't miss all 4 sites. We're going to go over there and see the memorial that's actually there. But again, this was 1857 when this happened. About 140 people were camped in the valley. Most of them were families from northwest Arkansas, led by Captain John T. Baker and Alexander Fancher. They were headed to new opportunities in California, and their worldly possessions included about 35 wagons, several hundred cattle, and many mules, horse, and oxen. And if I understand correctly, there was a tremendous amount of valuables in that wagon train. So some really fancy wagons, some fancy furniture, and of course, I'm sure they had a little bit of money with them as well, or quite a bit, as there was a lot of families that were traveling to California to find a better life. This little marble bench here, and in honored remembrance, may we forever remember the women, children, and wounded who died near here in September 11th, 1857, as part of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. They were killed without just cause. Most lie in unmarked graves somewhere in this valley. Only 17 small children survived, and they were later reunited with their extended families in Arkansas. So right out here in this beautiful land, these horrible events happened. You know, we come by here, it's right off the road. When we come by here, we travel to a lot of destinations, and so, you know, as we head north on this road here, there's a tremendous amount of sadness when you go by the location and when you're here, but we like to come by, and we've been here, it's the third, fourth time maybe, we kind of pay our respects. We've only filmed here a couple times. Main reason is really, it's just things like this is history. As horrific as it was, you know, we need to learn from things like this, I think. Okay, site number 3, this is the memorial to the men and older boys. So the placards all pretty much say the same thing on them, and it gives you the locations of it. But this would be the site of the massacre of the men and boys. So really what happened, the wagon train was under siege. Then after several days of fighting, they basically surrendered. The surrender was kind of void. Then when the militiamen came in, they separated the men, the boys, the women, children, and that's the spots that this took place. So this is the spot where the men and boys, and then down the road is where the women had theirs, and then they took the kids that were older, or younger, excuse me, 6 years old, down the road, and they took them in a wagon train, about 17 of them or so, to be raised, and then they were ultimately given back to their families. But this is the same thing, so never to be forgotten. But this is the place where the men and boys were massacred. I just hate using the word. I really don't like talking about it. Just documenting a little bit of history. Super sad. People still leave things here on the sites, which is great to see. But still a very sad situation. There's still a lot of farming going on out there. See some horses and some cattle out there. Very, very beautiful location. Well, that's going to do it for today in this location of Mountain Meadows Massacre site. A horrible event. We hope nothing like this ever happens again. And until our next adventure, goodbye from Weekend Escapades. We'll see you in the next one.